The man at table 12 just ordered in Sumerian. The maitre d' whispered with an uneasy smile, certain the young waitress would freeze like everyone else before her. Instead, Claire Bennett simply lifted her eyes from the leather-bound menu, offered the same calm smile she gave every guest, and replied in flawless Sumerian, her voice soft enough that only the billionaire and his distinguished visitors understood every word. In that instant, the laughter around the private dining room disappeared. Crystal glasses remained suspended halfway to waiting hands. Even the pianist in the corner seemed to hesitate between notes. Nathan Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Global and one of the most influential businessmen in America, slowly lowered the espresso cup he had been holding. For the first time in years, someone had answered one of his carefully planned tests without hesitation. 5 seconds earlier, he had been certain he controlled the room. Now he wasn't so sure. The evening had begun like dozens before it. Manhattan shimmered beyond the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, while black sedans lined the curb outside. Inside, polished marble reflected warm golden light. Conversations floated gently beneath the music, and every table hosted executives, diplomats, investors, or celebrities accustomed to getting exactly what they wanted. Claire moved quietly between them, balancing polished plates with practiced grace. She never rushed. She never sought attention. Most guests forgot her face within minutes, and she preferred it that way. A simple white shirt, a neatly pressed black apron, comfortable shoes that had carried her through thousands of shifts, and a silver name tag were all anyone noticed. They never looked beyond the uniform. They rarely wondered why someone with such composed posture spoke so little, or why her eyes lingered for just a heartbeat longer whenever she heard unfamiliar accents drifting across the dining room. She had learned years ago that silence was often the safest language. Nathan entered precisely at 7 o'clock, surrounded by investors from several countries. Conversations softened as he crossed the room. Expensive watches, tailored suits, confident smiles. Every detail reflected the certainty of a man who had spent decades winning. He acknowledged familiar faces with brief nods before taking his favorite corner table overlooking the city skyline. To many, he represented success itself. To those who worked around him, he was known for something else. Curiosity disguised as arrogance. He enjoyed discovering what people could do when they believed no one expected anything from them. Sometimes he rewarded talent generously. Sometimes he exposed pretenders. Tonight, however, boredom had inspired a different kind of experiment. As Claire approached with water glasses and menus, Nathan barely glanced up. His attention remained on a quiet exchange with one of his international guests. Then, with perfect timing and just enough volume for nearby tables to notice, he switched into a language so rare that even seasoned linguists seldom encountered it outside academic circles. Several guests exchanged amused smiles. One executive smirked before taking a sip of sparkling water. Another leaned closer, anticipating the inevitable confusion. Claire listened without interrupting. She finished pouring the last glass, gently placed the bottle on the table, and folded her hands behind her back. The room waited for embarrassment. What it received instead was something no one had imagined. Claire did not answer immediately. She allowed the silence to breathe, not because she needed time to think, but because she had learned that the right pause often carried more weight than the cleverest sentence. Then, with the same gentle tone she used when recommending dessert or refilling coffee, she responded in the ancient language with natural fluency, carefully matching the formal greeting before offering a respectful correction to one subtle grammatical choice Nathan had intentionally used. The visiting executive blinked in surprise before a warm smile spread across his face. He answered her enthusiastically, no longer looking at Nathan but directly at the young waitress standing beside the table. Claire nodded politely, exchanged several short sentences, and finished by asking whether he preferred sparkling or still water in his own language. The guest laughed with genuine delight. "Sparkling, please," he answered, still speaking to her instead of the billionaire across from him. Around the dining room, people sensed something extraordinary had happened even if they did not understand a single word. The laughter disappeared completely. A server carrying fresh bread slowed almost to a stop. The pianist resumed playing, but more softly now, as though careful not to interrupt whatever invisible shift had settled over the room. Nathan watched every detail without moving. He had expected confusion, perhaps embarrassment, perhaps an awkward apology. He had not expected elegance. More importantly, he had not expected accuracy. He recognized enough of the language to know she had gently corrected him without making him look foolish in front of his guests. It was a courtesy he had not extended to her. Claire simply poured the sparkling water into the crystal glass with steady hands, thanked the visitor in his own language once more, and returned to English as naturally as breathing. "Would you like a few more minutes before placing your dinner order?" she asked. Nothing in her expression suggested she had accomplished anything unusual. Her posture remained relaxed. Her eyes remained calm. She waited with quiet professionalism, giving everyone at the table the same respect she would have shown a family celebrating a birthday or an elderly couple sharing pie on a Sunday afternoon. Nathan studied her for several long seconds before answering. It was the first time all evening he had looked beyond the black apron and silver name tag. There was no triumph in her face, no trace of pride, no invitation to continue the conversation. Only patience. The kind of patience that came from someone who had stopped needing recognition a long time ago. Finally, he closed the menu. "We will need another minute," he said. "Of course, sir." Claire inclined her head slightly before turning toward another table where an older woman struggled to read the dessert menu beneath the dim candlelight. Without hesitation, Claire crouched beside her chair, quietly pointed to each selection, and described every ingredient with the same warmth she had shown moments earlier to one of the wealthiest men in the country. Nathan followed her with his eyes. Something refused to fit. People capable of mastering a language that almost no one spoke did not usually spend Friday evenings recommending soup specials and folding linen napkins. Yet there she was, moving through the dining room without drawing attention to herself, disappearing into ordinary moments as though extraordinary knowledge had never belonged to her at all. For reasons he could not yet explain, the business meeting suddenly mattered less than discovering who Claire Bennett really was. The conversation at Nathan's table resumed, but its rhythm had changed. His international guests continued discussing market forecasts, infrastructure projects, and long-term partnerships, yet Nathan heard only fragments. His attention drifted again and again toward the quiet waitress moving through the dining room with effortless precision. She greeted every guest by name when she could, remembered allergies without checking her notepad, and somehow anticipated what each table needed a moment before anyone asked. There was no performance in the way she worked, no attempt to impress. She simply noticed people. Nathan had built an empire by noticing details others ignored. A slight hesitation during a negotiation, an overlooked number in a financial report, a single sentence that revealed hidden intentions. That instinct had earned him billions of dollars. And it was the same instinct now telling him Claire Bennett did not belong where everyone assumed she did. One of his partners finally interrupted his thoughts. "Your waitress is remarkable," the older gentleman said with an appreciative smile. "She speaks with remarkable precision. That language has fewer than a handful of serious scholars in the United States." Nathan nodded without immediately responding. "I know," he answered quietly. "I underestimated her." The admission surprised even him. It was not a sentence he spoke often. Across the room, Claire carried 2 entrees to another table before stopping beside a young boy who frowned at the vegetables on his plate. She leaned down just enough to speak at eye level, pointing toward the colorful carrots and roasted potatoes with a warm smile. Within seconds the child laughed, picked up his fork, and happily took another bite while his relieved parents thanked her. She accepted their gratitude with the same gentle nod she had offered the billionaire only minutes earlier. Everyone received equal kindness. Nathan noticed that as well. Most people adjusted their behavior according to wealth or influence. Claire never did. The restaurant manager approached her briefly, whispered something, and handed her another reservation list. She glanced at it, smiled politely, and continued working without complaint despite the dining room remaining nearly full. Her composure seemed almost impossible. Nathan found himself wondering what kind of life produced that level of quiet discipline. It certainly was not luck. It was something deeper, something earned. The main course arrived, but he barely touched it. Instead, he watched Claire pause beside a bookshelf near the private wine display while waiting for the kitchen doors to open. For only a second, she ran her fingertips across the spine of an old volume displayed behind glass. It was written in another ancient language, one rarely recognized outside universities and museums. She did not open it. She simply smiled to herself before returning to work as though greeting an old friend. Nathan caught the gesture, and curiosity settled even more firmly into his mind. That was not coincidence. That was familiarity. His assistant, Daniel, who had quietly joined the dinner after another meeting downtown, leaned closer. "Is something wrong with the contract?" he asked. Nathan slowly folded his linen napkin and looked toward Claire once more. "No," he replied. "The contract is fine." Daniel waited. Nathan rarely left a thought unfinished. After several seconds, Nathan finally spoke again. "Tomorrow morning," he said calmly. "I want everything you can legally find about Claire Bennett. Education, employment, languages, references. I do not want rumors. I want facts." Daniel blinked in surprise. "The waitress?" Nathan nodded once. "People spend years trying to convince the world they are extraordinary," he said quietly. "She spent an entire evening trying to convince everyone she was ordinary. I have learned that those are usually the people worth knowing." Across the dining room, completely unaware of the decision that had just been made, Claire picked up another tray, thanked the kitchen staff with a quiet smile, and walked back beneath the warm lights, carrying herself with the same calm dignity that had silently transformed the entire evening. The dinner service settled into its steady rhythm, yet something invisible had shifted beneath the polished elegance of the restaurant. Claire sensed it without looking. She had worked long enough to recognize when a guest's attention followed her across the room. Some people watched because they were impatient, others because they needed another cup of coffee or another basket of warm bread. Nathan Caldwell watched for a different reason. His curiosity had replaced his confidence, and curiosity, Claire knew, could be far more persistent. She continued her work exactly as she always had. She greeted a retired couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, carefully describing the chef's special before recommending a bottle of California Pinot Noir that fit both their taste and their budget. She congratulated a young attorney on passing the bar after overhearing his parents quietly mention it. She thanked the dishwasher carrying stacks of clean plates with the same sincere smile she offered every guest. Titles meant very little to her. Character meant everything. Nathan noticed every interaction. None of them appeared rehearsed. None of them changed depending on who stood before her. She treated the millionaire and the maintenance worker with identical respect. That consistency fascinated him more than the languages she spoke. Most successful people adjusted themselves according to opportunity. Claire never seemed to calculate. She simply served with quiet excellence, as though doing ordinary things well was its own reward. Dessert menus arrived at his table, but no one reached for them immediately. The international delegation had drifted from business discussions into stories about history, architecture, and traditions from their respective countries. One distinguished guest from Eastern Europe smiled toward Claire as she approached to refill their water glasses. "Miss Bennett," he asked warmly, "may I ask you something?" She nodded politely. "Of course, sir. How many languages do you actually speak?" Several heads turned toward her. Even neighboring tables seemed to grow quieter. Claire hesitated for only a heartbeat before answering. "Enough to make people feel welcome when they are far from home." The guest laughed softly. That was not the question. She smiled with gentle humility. "Then I am afraid it is still the only answer I wish to give." The response carried no arrogance, only kindness wrapped inside healthy boundaries. Nathan almost smiled. She had answered without revealing anything at all. The guest accepted her answer graciously and thanked her before returning to the conversation. Claire collected an empty bread basket and moved toward the kitchen. Nathan's eyes followed her once again until Daniel quietly cleared his throat. "She avoided the question," Daniel observed. Nathan folded his hands together. "No," he replied. "She protected something." There was a difference, and he understood it immediately. People who had nothing to hide usually explained themselves freely. People who had sacrificed something valuable often learned to guard that part of their lives with quiet dignity. As Claire disappeared briefly behind the swinging kitchen doors, Nathan found himself replaying every word she had spoken since the evening began. Not once had she tried to impress anyone. She never corrected someone unless it prevented embarrassment. She never interrupted unless silence would have caused a misunderstanding. Even her remarkable knowledge seemed governed by restraint rather than pride. That realization unsettled him. Throughout his career, he had built companies by rewarding those who demonstrated exceptional ability. Yet how many extraordinary people had he overlooked simply because they never advertised themselves? Outside the towering windows, the lights of Manhattan shimmered across the river like scattered stars. Inside, crystal glasses reflected the same warm glow across white linen and polished silver. The restaurant looked exactly as it had an hour earlier, but Nathan knew something fundamental had changed. He had entered believing intelligence announced itself through titles, offices, and accomplishments. Across the dining room, a quiet waitress carrying a tray of coffee cups had begun teaching him that true brilliance often arrived wearing an apron, speaking only when kindness required it, and leaving everyone else to discover its value on their own. Claire returned with the dessert menus just as the conversation at Nathan's table drifted toward international expansion. The guests no longer waited for Nathan alone before speaking. More than once, their eyes followed Claire as she quietly refreshed coffee cups or cleared finished plates, and each time one of them offered a warm greeting in a different language. She answered each one naturally, never lingering long enough to become the center of attention. A brief exchange in Icelandic. A polite thank you in Georgian. A simple phrase in classical Armenian that made one elderly guest laugh with genuine delight. She treated every language the same way she treated every customer, as a bridge rather than a performance. Nathan noticed that she never volunteered her knowledge. She responded only when someone reached out first. It was as though she believed intelligence existed to serve people rather than impress them. The distinction stayed with him. As coffee arrived, one of the foreign delegates removed a folded document from his leather briefcase and placed it carefully on the table. It contained the ceremonial wording that would accompany a partnership announcement the following morning. The document had already been translated by a respected consulting firm, yet the distinguished visitor frowned as he quietly reread one paragraph. He spoke to Nathan in English. Something feels wrong. The words are technically correct, but they sound cold. Nathan scanned the page without immediately recognizing the problem. The vocabulary appeared precise. The grammar seemed flawless. Even so, his guest remained uneasy. Claire approached to refill a coffee cup, sensed the hesitation, and prepared to leave without interrupting. Before she could step away, the guest looked up with an apologetic smile. "Miss Bennett, may I trouble you with one question?" She paused respectfully. "If I am able to help, sir." He rotated the document toward her. "Would you read only this sentence?" Claire lowered her eyes to the page. She read silently for several seconds. The room grew unexpectedly quiet. Nathan studied her expression, searching for any sign of uncertainty. There was none. She gently placed the paper back onto the table. "The translation is accurate," she said softly. "But accuracy is not always the same as meaning." Every person at the table leaned forward. She continued carefully. This phrase was translated word for word. In the original culture, however, it expresses trust earned over generations, not merely cooperation between companies. If you read it this way tomorrow, your audience will hear a business agreement. If you express the original intention, they will hear respect. The visiting executive's eyes widened. "Can you show us the difference?" Claire hesitated only long enough to ensure everyone at the table welcomed the suggestion. Then she spoke the sentence exactly as it would naturally be delivered by a native scholar, her voice calm, measured, and filled with quiet warmth. Although Nathan understood only fragments, he immediately heard the difference. The language no longer sounded formal. It sounded human. The elderly delegate slowly removed his glasses, smiling with unmistakable gratitude. "That," he whispered, "is what my grandfather used to say." No one spoke for several moments afterward. The expensive translation lying on the table had communicated information. Claire had restored its soul. Nathan looked from the document to the quiet waitress standing beside the table and realized the greatest misunderstanding of the evening had never been about language at all. It had been about the difference between knowledge that filled a page and wisdom that understood people. Claire offered a quiet smile, thanked the distinguished guest for his kindness, and gently excused herself before anyone could ask another question. Within seconds, she disappeared into the familiar rhythm of the dining room, carrying a fresh pot of coffee toward another section as though nothing unusual had happened. The investors remained silent for several moments, each replaying what they had just witnessed. Finally, the elderly delegate folded the translated document with great care and slipped it back into his briefcase. I have spent 30 years attending international negotiations, he said thoughtfully. Very few people understand that language carries memory. Tonight your waitress reminded me of my father. Nathan rested his fingertips against the edge of his coffee cup without taking a sip. He had hired translators, consultants, professors, and cultural advisors throughout his career. They possessed impressive resumes and prestigious degrees, yet almost all of them approached communication like mathematics. Claire had approached it like humanity. That difference lingered in the room long after she had walked away. Daniel quietly leaned toward him once more. "Should I speak with the restaurant manager?" he asked. "Perhaps arrange a meeting after her shift?" Nathan looked across the dining room, where Claire patiently helped an elderly gentleman adjust the reading light beside his table before recommending a sugar-free dessert that matched his dietary restrictions. She listened more than she spoke. She never hurried anyone. Even when several tables needed her attention at once, she carried herself with the same unshakable calm. Nathan slowly shook his head. "No," he replied. "Not tonight." Daniel appeared surprised. Nathan almost always acted immediately whenever something captured his interest. Instead, he watched Claire thank the chef as another order left the kitchen, exchange a cheerful greeting with the pastry cook, and carry a tray toward the far corner of the restaurant. She belonged completely to the work she was doing, giving each task the same level of care, whether she was translating an ancient phrase or serving warm apple pie. Interrupting that would feel strangely disrespectful. One of the younger investors smiled across the table. "You look disappointed." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" The investor laughed softly. "You expected to discover someone showing off hidden talent. Instead, you found someone trying very hard not to." The observation settled quietly between them. Nathan realized it was true. Claire never sought admiration. If anything, she seemed relieved whenever attention moved elsewhere. That made her abilities even more remarkable. People who chased recognition usually announced their strengths. Claire concealed hers beneath ordinary moments until kindness required otherwise. As the evening continued, several guests from neighboring tables approached Nathan to greet him before leaving the restaurant. More than one of them casually mentioned the remarkable waitress. Not because she had spoken rare languages, but because she had remembered birthdays, noticed anniversaries, found comfortable seating for an elderly guest with a cane, and quietly replaced a child's spilled drink before the parents could become embarrassed. Nathan noticed the pattern immediately. Nobody praised her intelligence first. They praised how she made them feel. That realization struck him with unexpected force. Intelligence could impress a room for a few minutes. Character could remain in someone's memory for years. Outside, a gentle spring rain began tapping against the tall windows, softening the lights of Manhattan into shimmering reflections across the glass. Inside, Claire paused for only a moment beside the entrance to hold the door open for an elderly couple leaving hand in hand. They thanked her warmly. She wished them a safe drive home and returned to work before either of them could offer another compliment. Nathan watched her disappear once again among the tables, realizing that the greatest lesson of the evening had not come from an ancient language at all. It had come from a woman who understood that the rarest language in any room was genuine respect, because so few people chose to speak it every single day. By the time the last course was served, the restaurant had grown quieter. The rush of dinner service slowly gave way to the gentle rhythm that always arrived near closing, when conversations became softer and the city lights beyond the windows seemed brighter than the room itself. Claire moved through the remaining tables with the same steady grace she had shown since the beginning of her shift. Nothing in her expression suggested she had altered the course of an international conversation or earned the admiration of some of the most accomplished people in the room. She simply collected empty plates, folded fresh linen napkins, and thanked every guest who wished her a pleasant evening. Nathan watched her one final time before signaling for the check. When Claire approached, she placed the leather folder neatly beside him with both hands. "I hope everything was satisfactory this evening, Mr. Caldwell," she said with the same calm professionalism she had shown from the moment he entered the restaurant. Nathan looked at her for several seconds before answering. "It was far more than satisfactory." Claire smiled politely. "I am glad to hear that." She turned slightly, prepared to continue toward another table, but Nathan spoke again. "Miss Bennett." She paused. "Yes, sir. May I ask you one question?" There was something different in his voice now. The confidence remained, but the challenge had disappeared. Claire nodded. If it is something I can answer. Nathan rested one hand on the closed check folder. Why are you working here? The question hung quietly between them. Nearby conversations continued without interruption, yet for Nathan the dining room seemed to fade into the background. Claire did not appear offended. She simply considered the question with the same care she gave every response throughout the evening. Finally, she smiled, though there was a trace of sadness hidden somewhere behind the warmth in her eyes. Because this is where I work. Nathan almost laughed at the simplicity of the answer. That is not what I meant. I know, Claire replied gently. Then what did you mean? Nathan searched for the right words. Someone with your knowledge could teach at a university, work for an embassy, advise governments. Yet you chose this. Claire glanced briefly toward another server carrying a tray that looked slightly too heavy and quietly stepped forward to help balance it before returning her attention to Nathan. The small gesture passed almost unnoticed by everyone else. Sometimes life asks us to choose between the path we planned and the people we love, she said softly. I made my choice a long time ago. Nathan remained silent. Claire continued only because he genuinely seemed willing to listen. Dreams can wait. People cannot. There was no bitterness in her voice. No regret. Only acceptance. Nathan realized she had answered far more than his question without revealing a single private detail. She had drawn a boundary with kindness instead of distance. Before he could speak again, the restaurant manager called Claire's name from across the dining room. A delivery had arrived at the rear entrance, and another table needed assistance. She inclined her head politely toward Nathan. Please excuse me, Mr. Caldwell. Have a safe drive home. Then she was gone once more, disappearing into the quiet choreography of the restaurant. Nathan remained seated even after signing the receipt. He looked at the generous tip he had written, then closed the folder without another glance. For the first time in many years, he understood that money was the easiest gift he could offer and perhaps the least meaningful one. The woman who had quietly changed the entire evening had never asked for admiration, opportunity, or reward. She had only offered respect, one conversation at a time, expecting nothing in return. As Nathan stood to leave beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers, he carried with him a question that refused to fade. What kind of story could lead someone extraordinary to become so completely content with remaining unseen? The rain had stopped by the time Nathan stepped outside, but he did not climb into the waiting sedan. Instead, he stood beneath the restaurant's entrance canopy for a moment, watching reflections ripple across the wet Manhattan sidewalk. Daniel opened the rear door and waited. Office? He asked. Nathan looked back through the tall windows where Claire could still be seen clearing the final tables beneath the warm chandeliers. Yes, he answered quietly. There is something I need to understand. Less than an hour later, the top floor of Caldwell Global overlooked a sleeping city. The boardrooms were empty, the hallways silent, and only a handful of lights remained on throughout the building. Nathan removed his suit jacket, loosened his tie, and stood beside the enormous windows while Daniel entered carrying a thin folder. This is everything available tonight, Daniel explained. Public records only. Anything deeper will require more time. Nathan accepted the folder without speaking. The first page surprised him immediately. Claire Bennett, bachelor's degree completed with highest honors. Graduate research in historical linguistics. Academic recognition from multiple universities. Published papers cited by respected scholars years earlier. Nathan slowly turned another page. There were recommendations describing exceptional discipline, uncommon humility, and a rare ability to preserve meaning across cultures rather than simply translating words. Then the record simply stopped. No prestigious university appointment. No international consulting career. No government position. Instead, employment records showed restaurants, cafes, and hospitality work stretching back several years. Daniel folded his hands. It does not make much sense. Nathan continued reading. At the bottom of one page appeared a brief public notice mentioning that Claire had withdrawn from a doctoral fellowship shortly after her mother received a long period of medical treatment. There were no interviews, no dramatic headlines, only a quiet timeline showing that while classmates advanced into celebrated careers, Claire had disappeared from academic life almost overnight. Nathan closed the folder and remained silent. Suddenly her words echoed with painful clarity. Dreams can wait. People cannot. They had not been philosophy. They had been autobiography. Daniel carefully broke the silence. Should I continue the background search? Nathan looked once more toward the lights of the city stretching beyond the glass. Yes, he replied, but respectfully. I do not want gossip. I do not want personal intrusion. I only want to know whether there is a way to offer an opportunity without becoming another person who assumes he knows what is best for her. Daniel nodded. Understood. Early the following morning, the partnership delegation gathered inside Caldwell Global Headquarters before the official signing ceremony. Executives adjusted presentation screens while assistants organized documents and refreshments. Everything appeared perfectly prepared until the senior international delegate quietly frowned at the ceremonial speech one final time. The revised translation from the previous evening had not yet reached the printing department. Hundreds of elegant programs already displayed the older wording that sounded technically correct but emotionally distant. Several executives immediately began discussing deadlines, reprinting costs, and scheduling concerns. Nathan listened for only a moment before making his decision. Delay the opening by 30 minutes, he said calmly. The room fell silent. 30 minutes? One vice president repeated in disbelief. Every guest has already arrived. Nathan nodded. Then they can enjoy another cup of coffee. We are not presenting the wrong message simply because it is convenient. The distinguished delegate smiled with quiet appreciation. Do you know someone who can help us? Nathan looked through the conference room windows toward the bright morning skyline. A calm voice from the previous evening seemed to answer before he spoke. Yes, he said with complete certainty. I know exactly who understands what these words are truly supposed to mean. Less than 40 minutes later, a black sedan stopped quietly outside the restaurant, just as Claire finished arranging fresh flowers near the hostess stand before the lunch service began. She looked up with mild surprise when the maitre d' approached and softly explained that someone wished to speak with her. Nathan stood near the entrance without the confidence that had filled the room the night before. Today there was something different about him. He waited until Claire walked over before saying a single word. Good morning, Miss Bennett. She smiled politely. Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. He held a leather portfolio in one hand, but made no effort to open it. I owe you an apology. Claire tilted her head slightly, saying nothing. Nathan continued. Yesterday I spoke a rare language because I wanted to embarrass someone I assumed knew less than I did. Instead, I embarrassed myself. The admission was quiet, sincere, and completely unexpected. Several employees nearby instinctively looked away, sensing that they were witnessing something personal rather than dramatic. Claire answered with the same calm voice that had never once changed throughout the previous evening. We all make assumptions sometimes. Nathan nodded. Yes, but not all of us have the grace to correct them with kindness. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The morning sunlight filtered through the restaurant windows, casting long reflections across the polished floor where the previous night's footsteps had disappeared. Nathan finally opened the portfolio and removed a single page. Our partnership ceremony begins in less than 1 hour. The translation prepared for the presentation is technically correct, but it has lost the meaning you helped us understand. I would like to ask whether you would be willing to review it. Claire accepted the page, read it quietly, and after only a minute circled 3 sentences with a pen borrowed from the hostess stand. She rewrote each one carefully, preserving not only the vocabulary but also the respect hidden inside the original expressions. When she handed the page back, Nathan read the revisions slowly. Even in English, the warmth felt unmistakable. He looked up with genuine gratitude. Thank you. Claire simply smiled. Language is about helping people recognize one another. Nathan carefully folded the page before reaching into his jacket pocket and placing a business card on the reception desk. If there is ever a day when your own dreams become your priority again, there will always be a place for you at Caldwell Global. There is no deadline. There is no expectation. It is simply an open door. Claire looked at the card for a moment, but did not pick it up immediately. That is very generous. Nathan shook his head gently. No, respect should not begin with an offer. It should have begun yesterday, before I knew anything about you. Claire finally accepted the card, not as a promise, but as a gesture honestly given. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. He smiled for the first time without pride. Please call me Nathan. As he turned toward the exit, he paused once more. You taught me something I should have learned years ago. Claire waited quietly. Nathan looked back with thoughtful eyes. The rarest language in any room is not spoken by scholars or billionaires. It is spoken by people who choose dignity before judgment. He walked into the bright Manhattan morning, leaving behind neither applause nor spectacle, only a quiet lesson that lingered long after the door closed. Claire slipped the business card into her apron pocket, straightened a slightly crooked menu by the entrance, welcomed the next guests with her familiar warm smile, and returned to work exactly as she always had, because extraordinary people do not become extraordinary the moment the world finally notices them. They were extraordinary all along.